Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast. This is your host, Howard Fox. The Career Focus series supports individuals pursuing careers that tap into their skills and passions and introduces you to the entrepreneurs and companies that are helping to make that dream a reality. Our guest today is Joe Frodsham. Joe is the president of Career Management Partners. Now, CMP is a talent and transition firm in the business of developing people and organizations across the full talent lifecycle, from executive search and leadership development to organizational development and career transition support. Joe is the co-author of 2 books on careers, Make It Work and Don't Dread Monday, Your Guide to Career Success. He is a speaker and recognized expert on careers, employee engagement, leadership development, organization development, and talent systems. Now, we interviewed Joe back in 2020 when we discussed his book, Don't Dread Monday. And with 2 years having passed and COVID-19, I thought, what a great opportunity let's bring Joe back onto the Career Focus podcast, and let's see what he's been up to. So, Joe, welcome, and it's great to have you back on the show.
Howard, thank you so much for having me back. It's great catching up with you too. And thank you very much for that intro. I look forward to the chat.
Fantastic. So you and I met back in, God, I want to say it was May 2020. And for our guests, we're going to provide a link back to that podcast we produced with Joe. But we're going to be coming up on 2 years now. And I was just getting ready to move from Chicago to Las Vegas. You're down in Dallas. So catch us up on what you've been up to.
Well, yeah, it's been, I feel like we're almost in this global village, Howard, with all of us kind of collectively experiencing a series of events. 2 years has felt like 20 in so many ways. Yeah, we've continued trucking. Fortunately, the CMP brand has been strong. We've got a lot of good clients, but we've had to adapt to survive and to thrive, just like so many other businesses. As you already alluded to, a big part of our business is outplacement. And so there was a period of time last year where that did very well. A lot of companies were getting payroll off the books, and we were glad to support those folks in transition and mitigate the risk of those actions with the employees. Now it's the big resignation and the big hire. So our search business and our assessment business has really taken off, as well as our coaching, but not much outplacement. So fortunately, we have a model that's been able to pivot. But since we've last talked, Howard, certainly there's a lot of things that have really kind of gained the spotlight. Certainly George Floyd happened since last time we chatted. I think a lot of what we see now is organizations can no longer be on the sidelines when it comes to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The melding of, or I should say the mainstreaming of mental health has been very interesting. So many of our clients now are asking for support, help, and solutions, and helping their employees who are isolated, who, are really having stress-induced issues. And a lot of times you would say, well, keep that at home. That doesn't belong in the workplace. Or now I see companies really feeling like they got to take a position and care about the whole person and kind of get involved in aspects of the community, society, and even individual employee kind of issues that even 2 or 3 years ago, we just weren't engaging with. So a lot has changed.
Okay. A question that I'm curious about, and I haven't asked others who are in spaces similar to yours, this whole idea of the great resignation, and the media, whoever they might be, whatever spectrum they might be on, talks about it or pays lip service to it. Was this a reality with COVID? Was it because of COVID that people were suddenly saying, my company doesn't take care of me, or they've laid me off, I'm not going back, I'm afraid to go back, be around other people? What is, from your perspective, what's been the reality of this great resignation, if it indeed is something that's true?
Well, it's interesting. Statistically, we've seen that there was a much higher percentage than normal of people resigning towards the end of last year. So I think statistically it's true. Having said that, anytime we say the great resignation, we almost kind of visualize everyone resigning. Well, of course, that's not true. The vast majority of folks did not resign. And I think they're in different levels of tentative relationship with their employers. We do know there's a lot of kind of conditions that have led to, I think, talent being really having the power more than companies right now. Obviously, we have very, very low unemployment rates. And we have now companies, it's interesting, we're on the search side. 3 years ago, we were always asked to find talent in a particular city, say Atlanta or Dallas or Las Vegas or Chicago or Kansas City or LA. Whereas now most employers are like, well, they don't have to live here as long as they're willing to come here periodically. I think we've really mainstreamed this idea of remote work to the point where we're willing to kind of attract talent wherever they sit, not require them to move. So as a result, you have all these conditions. Talent people have more options than ever, and often options to stay right at where they're at, not have to get in the car and commute every day. So as a result, people feeling pretty empowered, and I do think there was pent-up demand, but they're also feeling pretty empowered to leave and go to their next. Now, there's a couple of things we've also seen just as meta trends, even beyond the data, which I think is interesting. One is people just aren't retiring anymore. It's really interesting. We do a lot of executive outplacement and career transition support. And I almost every person I talk to that's really at that stage and even has the ability financially to retire, don't want to retire. They want to keep a toe in it. They want to do board work, volunteer work, consulting work, buy a franchise. Everyone wants to keep a toe in it. These days of like getting the golf clubs, moving to the villages and golfing for 20 years before I die just don't seem to be happening anymore. People really are kind of wanting to stay in the game. And we also see from a transition standpoint is a lot of times when people do transition forcibly or otherwise outside of a company, their next gig might not be a full-time gig. The gig economy is very real. And there's a lot of this rent to own where people are taking kind of 6-month assignments where the employer employees see each other, see if they like each other first. So let's kind of date before we get married sort of thing. So those are some of the meta trends that we're at least seeing in the market.
Do you find that the companies, in whether they're, medium-sized, large, and I don't know exactly how you defined that, whether it's around headcount or revenue, do you find that some companies were better able to pivot to create this work from home environment with perhaps a requirement you have to go into the office every once in a while, but they were able to pivot and do it successfully so that they have become potentially a preferred employer versus others that say, okay, you have to be in the office. There's just no way around it. And I don't think we're necessarily talking about the essential workforce because that's totally different, I believe.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was wide disparity as far as how companies really adjusted and adapted to COVID and how it worked in their workplace. We saw regional differences, in complete honesty. I'm not taking the position one way or the other, but we definitely saw some states where they're still at home and other states where they've been going to work for 6 to 8 months. And that's, quote, the norm, whatever that is for that state and that city. So we see obviously local mandates and so on that are highly variable. We got 50 different states, and within that, even large cities handling it differently. So I don't think there is kind of one approach. What I do see though is that every company had to, I love the old adage, and I say it in my company all the time. And I didn't come. Of course, it's Darwin's quote, right? And it's not the fastest and smartest, but the most flexible or adaptive that survive and thrive. And those that pivoted have tended to survive and thrive in the midst of COVID. We saw it within restaurants, those that had curbside pickup, those that adjusted their menu, those that did meal kits, those that had delivery option that actually worked, those that had drive-through, maybe went to double lanes with drive-through. Those that pivoted quickly tended to thrive. And I know a number of our clients did that. Those that didn't pivot have really had a challenge, right? And so that's what's been interesting. Now, when you get into kind of your initial question there, which is how do you treat employees during COVID? What has evolved, at least in our observation, is a couple of key success factors. One is beyond whether they had them come into work or when they had them come into work or not. Those companies that did the best job, and so far have done the best job with COVID, are the ones that truly, genuinely put the employee first. not profitability first, the employee first. We have one healthcare system here in Dallas that we do a lot of work with. And their CEO literally had a 20 to 30 minute town hall every day virtually, talking about the newest updates, what they've learned, taking questions. And so he's become a hero, honestly, because he was so responsive, so employee first. And they do have people coming in now, even to the office, non-essential workers, but people have bought in because they understand the rationale, they get the why. The communication was so amazing, and it was so caring, and it was so employee first. Then there's other companies where the communication was lacking, the empathy was lacking. And so when you ask them to do something like come into work, they resisted. The change wasn't managed very well. So it really, really did highlight where did leaders step up, build trust, build rapport, put the employee first and their needs first, and where didn't they? And even those companies that are kind of asking the same thing of the employees, based on whether the leaders did that or didn't that, we see a lot different levels of engagement and willingness to work with the employer on that. So those are some of the things that we've seen relative to COVID.
Okay. An area, and I don't know how much you can speak on this, and is the topic of mental health, because from my vantage point, we are in some areas in similar industries. I do career development coaching. Occasionally I'll do some career transition coaching and outplacement. And within the development space, there has been a mental health concern as people having to work from home, being isolated. Maybe they still have kids who can't get into daycare, because I think daycares have really hurt because the rules, whether it's state and local or federal rules, or about bringing kids into that kind of an environment. I mean, I feel bad for teachers, and I feel bad for like the daycare centers, those kinds of businesses. But I think the mental health of the employee has really taken a turn for that. From my perspective, there's a concern, because the folks that have to work from home, that have to make these adjustments, they need help. Do you find that the companies that you're working with, are they also addressing the mental health aspect?
Some are, a lot are, but not all are. And I'm glad but of course you have to watch it, right? I mean, there is this kind of fuzzy line between one's personal life and one's professional life. So some of the good things I've seen in the area of mental health, as far as companies playing a more active role, there was some training that we offered, actually a couple of them, but one in particular I'm thinking of right now, where was signs to look for, where your employees might really be having some challenges, and not, what to say, what you can't say, and what's appropriate, what is appropriate, and what resources are there and available. What we found is, isolation is very real for a lot of employees. Even my own firm, we have a number of our employees who are in the high risk. So we told them they absolutely have no expectation of coming into the office. We are glad for them to work and operate virtually. But a lot of them are alone, and our company's not any different. So they need more communication from the company. We need to be looking for those signs where they might be struggling and having a problem. We need to know what resources to guide them to and let them know it's confidential. And if they do divulge and share with their manager, what does their manager need to do with that information? What's appropriate? So HR has definitely been making they've been earning their salary the last few years, trust me.
Sure.
If they're doing their job. And so mental health, what I love, and I love some of the commercials we're seeing on TV and during NFL games, et cetera, the mainstreaming and the normalizing of discussing challenges with mental health is incredibly positive. I think it's enormous. I think it saves lives, honestly, Howard. And now in the company context, we're trying to navigate a new world where people are going to bring that into the workplace. We got to be considerate of it. We got to be attuned to it. But of course, we're an employer. You're not there. There's a line there you can't cross. And where is that line is something I think we're all trying to figure out right now.
Do you have a sense that because of COVID, and maybe that was the great equalizer here, that organizations have to rethink what is good and meaningful work, and how do we ensure not only we get the most out of our employees, but we also are attentive to what their needs are?
I think COVID was a big one, my friend. I really do. It's tough to know why and what the genesis or the etymology of kind of where we're at is now, but we're here now. And I do think we all saw, I think there's two massive kind of macro stressors. I think COVID was a macro stressor. Honestly, I think the riots associated with the summer of 2020, at least when we talk to people and work with people in coaching and CEOs, was a massive kind of collective stressor too, honestly. Right on the heels then of some elections and a variety of other things that were contested. A lot of people really went through a very difficult time with those macro stressors in and above anything they were feeling at a micro level in an isolated environment where you had stay-at-home parents with kids who now had to be taught from home remotely, with grandparents who they couldn't see because of their age, with a lot of uncertainty around this virus that was swirling. I think these macro stressors collectively created a tsunami. And so it took some people to a breaking where any support system they had was really taxed. If you didn't have a support system, you reached out to folks at work and other places like that, and all of a sudden you're having to deal with all these issues that had no precedent. So I do think COVID was part of it. I think those other issues were part of it, honestly. And we're kind of settling on the other side of it to some level of new normal. And a lot of people talk about the new normal as being COVID might be here to stay. Maybe that's true for sure, but I think the new normal is remote work, a fuzzier line between kind of what we are now working at home. Home and work are now becoming more one. How do you create boundaries? How do you have a relationship with employees as a manager when you hear the dog barking and you have a kid sitting on the lap? And there's a whole new arrangement how we work and bring home and work together that I think is truly the new normal we're trying to figure out.
And it's funny, but I believe that is in some ways refreshing versus everything just had to be inside. You had to make that 20, 30, 40, 1 hour commute. I mean, heaven knows.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Oh my God.
I think it's humanized so many people. I love it. I think there is you use the word equalizer out. I agree with that. I think we all had to deal with very similar stuff. There was empathy that happened. And I've always thought that you want a human face on an organization. It can't be totally antiseptic. And if done well, I think it's built trust and a human face to people and situations. It can be very positive, honestly.
Sure. I'm curious, and you had mentioned this healthcare company where the CEO was having his meeting on a daily basis. Do you see more of that kind of communication, whether, it is kind of a town hall or a podcast where individuals in the organization are coming together to talk about, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the things. Here's what's on the horizon. Here's what's changing, as a way to bring to the surface more of what in the past had been. It's where we share on a need to know basis. So we're more transparent. That would be the word that I would use.
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders have, but not all, honestly. And I think they're kind of paying the price if they haven't. I think those organizations that have really showed empathy for real. It's interesting. We have a number of executive coaches, Howard, that are out there working with executives all the way down to managers. And about every quarter we kind of meet and talk about what are the common issues that you're seeing in your coaching work. And over the last year and a half, especially at the top of the house in the executive coaching, it's been stress. It's been navigating ambiguity and stress. And what we found is a lot of these C-suite folks are really dealing with a lot of unprecedented, not understanding and knowing, a lot of pressure from the board to bring them back, but they're not thinking it's right, or vice versa. With now they're having to take a stance on things that they're not sure they agree with. So there's a lot of unknown and ambiguity that these leaders have gone through. And I think those that have talked it out, have a support system, have not waited till they have all the answers to communicate to their employees, have done much better than those that have tried to control, even when things are out of control the messaging, control their employees, try to impose control in the midst of ambiguity where it's not an appropriate response. So
Sure.
I don't know what you've seen. I've seen a real mix, honestly, as far as leaders that have adapted, pivoted, communicated, have done a lot better than those that haven't, both personally and professionally, honestly.
I think, you kind of quoted Mr. Darwin, and I think his philosophies, his beliefs are definitely out there to be seen today. I mean, we have to adapt, and we also have to understand how do we take care of ourselves and the community. I would love if you could share, Joe, some of the changes that have gone on with CMP. I mean, when we met again almost 2 years ago, we talked about the book. You mentioned it's in the second edition. So, what have been some of the evolutions, your pivots? Perhaps share a little bit more detail.
Well, it's a couple of things. One is, of course, we had a model that was a lot of pivot, but George Floyd issues last almost 2 years, 2.5 years ago. We're a minority and women-owned firm. Mary Ann Frodsham, my wife, owns 51%. I own 49%. We are the largest minority and women-owned firm in the United States that supports a full talent life cycle. I say that because when that happened, we were approached, well, you guys, what's your opinion on all of this? The racial strife, et cetera. We had to really think about it. We have an interracial family, and if I could be dead honest, we hadn't thought much about it before. We kind of lived our life in the way that we thought was good and positive, how we do business, how our personal life was, et cetera. And what we realize is our passion has and always will be helping people, especially the underrepresented communities. And so we put a huge effort over the last 2 years into building the world's first ever Latino career assessment. In fact, if you go to latinocareerassessment.com, you'll see our launch out there. It's using the validated assessment science that honestly we've been using with companies for 20 years and applying that to the Latino cultural script and narrative, and really building a set of tools at a very, very low price. We probably won't make money on it, and that's okay. It is what we believe in, is providing real-time access to assessment and development tools and experiences for Latino professionals. So that is something we were working on before. We doubled down because we thought it would be a very positive thing for a community we care deeply about. So that is a big part of kind of what we're launching and doing. And honestly, very excited about. We had our first board meeting. We've put a board together of Latino executives who are kind of our reference point for this. And we've worked with IP Living out of Mexico City, who's helped us develop a platform to deliver this. So we've had our IOT, Industrial Organizational Psychology team, work for 1.5 years, getting a validated set of questions that are predictive, and it's all coming together. So I would say we were going to do it anyway, but our intention and focus has just been a triple-fold, largely because of, if I can be honest, kind of the events of the summer of 2020.
Sure. Can you share, perhaps go another layer deeper on this Latino career assessment? How is it helping, aiding the individuals who are going to be taking this assessment, and in what context is it being delivered?
Yeah, great question. The Latino career assessment, there's been a lot of great research over the last 15 years on the Latino career chasm, right? So currently, Latinos make about 18.5% of the population of the United States, yet only about 3% of executive roles are filled by Latinos. Now, some of that is because of first generation new entrants into the market in the United States, but that only accounts for a little bit of the noise and difference. It's a huge career chasm. And if you look at the data, you see it, right? That they tend to be employed at a very high rate, but Latinos tend not to move up in most organizations very far. And there's a lot of reasons for that we're trying to address with the Latino career assessment. One reason is great research over the last 15 years, some of which we've led and written about in Forbes and other places, is the cultural script, right? Which I know very well now, our family, that the cultural script of respect at all costs, don't speak back to an elder, et cetera, which are wonderful aspects of the culture, but don't always play well in an organization. And then, of course, there's, as a leader, how do I engage my Latino talent, knowing just a few key and important aspects of their cultural narrative? So we have an assessment out there that Latino professionals take that costs literally in the $60 range. And what they get is a report that gives them, based on our research, a very clear, intuitive snapshot of their strengths and areas that they can focus on to be effective and successful in their career. And then a complete development guide on specific actions and activities to actually address those. So right now, there's a lot of great Latino leadership programs out there. Often they cost, though, anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000. You need AT&T and big companies like that we work with to sponsor you. This one will give you a quality development experience for way under $100. So it's accessible to all. And we have retail individuals who will take it. We also have companies who have enterprise resource groups, Latin pathways groups, et cetera, that are bringing that into the company to help that population.
Excellent. Before we kind of end the conversation today, I'm curious about, given your background, your wife's background, and all the type of work that you're doing, and we talked a little bit about the trends due to COVID and the post-COVID reality. Are there any new careers or perhaps work that we used to do and took for granted, but now it's on the front burner and it's really making a difference today? And this is kind of a gotcha question, so I apologize in advance, but you're a professional. I know you're going to handle this. But any other trends that you're seeing, like, wow, this is going to play a big factor in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, absolutely. We talked a little bit about mental health in the workplace. We're so in the dark ages still when it comes to all the machinations of mental illness and mental challenges and depression and bipolar disorder, et cetera. And we've never really, as a society, even many families, feel comfortable talking about it. And now as we open the lid on that, and now we're expected to deal with it, understand it, empathize with it, help solve it. What we found is that more and more, there's like we have some PhD psychologists we work with. They're under heavy demand by companies now, helping us HR professionals, leaders, managers really up our game and helping us think through, first of all, understand the vocabulary. What does bipolar mean? What does depressive mean? What does mania mean? What does all these different variants mean? Schizophrenia, what different variants of it? Having just some threshold of understanding of all that, and then how to navigate that. Part of it is, okay, train us. But the other one is we need a referent person in companies who managers, HR can go to and say, okay, we have this one unique issue with this employee. Help us think through what the smartest and most productive thing to do is. So to answer your question, one thing that people who have a little bit more knowledge and sophistication in dealing with mental health in the context of organizations are under huge demand right now. I think they will continue to be. And they usually have some sort of clinical psychology background or something now deployed to help leaders be a safe path for leaders, an outlet for leaders, and help managers better manage their people against this kind of mental health imperative. I think that's one that's probably here to stay. Kind of whatever you call that role in companies, it's happening.
Sure. I can totally track with what you've just been sharing. Given your background and the firm's background and the services and the products that you make available to your clients, when you are working with someone in a transition space or an whether it's a voluntary or involuntary, or perhaps you're invited to speak to a local university about career development, what advice, Joe, would you give to the individual about the future of meaningful employment?
Oh, I think great question. And we get asked that all the time. And I got a couple of very strong opinions that I think are more true than ever. I mean, we both quoted Darwin now, right? It's not the fastest and smartest, but the most adaptive that survive and thrive. I think there's no more true than careers right now. It's funny. I was in front of a group at a large healthcare system, a different one than the individual I shared before. And there, it was a very tenured set of professionals. It was about 15 or 16 in the small group I was talking to. And I asked them, and they're all tenured. They'd all been out of college at least 15 years. So I said, how many of you are in a job that you knew even existed in college? And nobody. I think we all have to have career improvisation. We all have to not be rigid. We have to really take it in, learn, think. Might not be a full-time gig. You might be a series of kind of part-time, gigs. You might, like me, have kind of a spiral career where you do 2 or 3 different things through the course of your career, and all of that is okay. So I do think those that are flexible, those that are adaptive, those that know what they love to do, and always stay contemporary and deliver service and excellence to their company, I think will do much better than those that need some sort of certainty and clarity. They need, when I interview folks, even in our firm, and they say, well, how many years before I'm a manager? I go, I don't know. Is that important to you? Yeah, because I want to be a manager before I'm 30. I don't know that that's a great answer. And maybe that will work somewhere else, but most companies, I can't guarantee you that. I think that's the wrong question. You need to go in with a learning attitude and know that the world will change in ways that none of us can predict. And there spells opportunity if you're adaptive, if that makes sense.
Sure. One thing that I've also learned and appreciate is this, talk about adaptability, is whatever we do, whether it is full-time, part-time, a series of, for the sake of a better word, side hustles, whatever.
Sure.
We are on a path of continuous professional development, whatever that might be. Because if we stop, we risk being blindsided to the point where our skill, our expertise, what we bring to the table is no longer relevant because things have just changed so fast. So we have to have that continuous professional development.
I totally agree with you, Howard. I think more than ever, getting the learning, the certifications, going left, learning about yourself, and building your network very aggressively, making sure that you build really, really thoughtful, smart relationships inside and outside of the company, within your areas of focus, within your industry, within the geographies you want to be in, I think is more important than ever, honestly.
Sure. Listen, Joe, before we head out, I want to make sure if our listeners want to learn more about you, your work, CMP, the Latino Career Assessment, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Career MP, our website is www, obviously, career, M as in Mary, P as in Paul.com. So careermp.com. And then Latino Career Assessment is latinocareerassessment.com. And feel free to reach out to me. There's a way to contact me on either one of those websites. And I'm I always try to check and be responsive. Glad to continue the conversation.
Fantastic. It will provide, obviously, the backlinks to careermp.com and latinocareerassessment.com. And of course, on your LinkedIn profile as well. So, Joe, it's been a pleasure to have you come back onto the podcast. We've kind of rebranded it a little bit because we took all of our career episodes and made it a series. So it's now the Career Focus series on Success Insight podcast. And I would love for this to be perhaps a yearly event, just kind of having you back on and seeing what you've been up to. And we both have a passion for helping individuals, whoever, if it's coming out of college, high school for that matter, or a transition within their career, or perhaps a plan B afterwards, finding meaningful work that they're happy to do every day. Because heaven knows there's no place if we're not satisfied. I mean, that's, I think, what's been relevant for me in COVID is really, we have to take care of ourselves, our family, and our community. We can't do this, not care about the people around us. So thank you.
Oh, I couldn't agree. Howard, way to pivot and adapt yourself as far as the rebranding, my friend. You're living it. Way to go.
Fantastic. Well, listen, stay on the line for a second. We're going to do a quick close, and then you and I can have a final chat. Okay?
You betcha, man. Thanks, Howard.
Very good. All right, folks. We've just been chatting with Joe Frodsham, author, and talent solutions professional. The firm, he and his wife, are growing very successfully. Career Management Partners, CMP. Again, their talent and transition focus, business developing, people and organizations across the entire talent life cycle. So executive search, leadership development, organization development, and career transition. And really, this is a fascinating conversation today on how CMP has pivoted, that's an important word, adapt and pivot to the circumstances we are in since 2020 with COVID and then beyond. And I love the final insight is people have to really be cognizant of what they're doing, what they want to do, find ways to stay relevant and just adapt, whether it's going on to get some more education, certifications, new trainings. And the future of work is not necessarily going to be that full-time job. It could be a series of part-time gigs. You might just have a part-time job and decide you're going to do something else. So the future of work is evolving and you need to adapt. So we're going to go back and find some quotes from Mr. Darwin because he's very relevant today. All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed today's episode with Joe. And on the Career Focus series on the Success Insight podcast, again, we're looking for individuals who are pursuing those career changes and the companies and entrepreneurs that are helping to make that change a reality. If you enjoyed today's episode of the Career Focus series, check us out on successinsightpodcast.com. We are also on LinkedIn and Facebook on Success Insight Podcast. And we are also on the major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and especially Spotify, where we have the Career Focus series playlist. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care of yourselves, your family, support your community, and we will see you on a future episode of the Career Focus series on the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.